Got it. Thanks. All right, let's call this meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Public comment. The Texas Open Meetings Act. Oh, I do have do I have a quorum present? Thank you. The Texas Open Meetings Act prohibits the board from responding to any comments other than to refer the matter to a future agenda, to an existing policy, or to a staff person with specific factual information. Claims against the board or employees, as well as individual personal appeals, are not appropriate for citizens forum. Would you like to speak? Would you please state your name? Yeah.
Lily Bush Reeves. I just wanted to thank all of you for your support of the Main Street Hospitality Suite at their Market on Main event. It was overwhelming for the first time in a number of years. We did not have any problems getting people to bring things, and thank you one and all very much. Thank you.
Public comment. Got it done. Texas Open Meetings Act, we've got that done, so we're going to move it on to consent agenda. Has everybody seen their minutes? We've got a lot of minutes here from, well, a lot of financial reports that we need to, I guess, make sure that we pay attention to. So is there anything that anybody has any questions on with regard to the financial reports?
Second.
Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Action items. Consider and act upon approval of amendment of incentive policy. So I'll make a statement with regard to this. I think there's been a little bit of question with regard to why this is on the agenda. The deal that we did for Shears included equipment that doesn't stay attached to the building, and I think in our application that we have that they fill out and we all consent to, there's some language in that is vague, I would say at the best. Yeah, with regard to us being able to approve something that doesn't stay attached to the building. And all this is doing, we're not changing the Shears agreement. We're not doing anything like that. It doesn't affect that at all. All this does is kind of broaden our scope as to the ability to, in the future, if we so choose as a board or boards after us, to be able to approve things that aren't attached to the building going forward. So in other words, like the deal that we did for Sweet Home Texas Eatery, that was a drainage deal that's going to stay with the project, obviously, whether they're there or not. In this case, Shears could leave tomorrow and take that equipment because it's not attached to the building, and this is allowing us a little bit of a, like I said, a broader range to be able to approve or disapprove that. Correct.
Kathy, could you tell me where in this document that revised language is?
It is not, because
Okay, so what in particular does Stan, the city attorney, or not city attorney, but our legal counsel, what in particular in this did he have, I guess, a qualm with that we needed to talk about? Do you you see anything in here that actually says that that it has to stay with the building, I guess? Because I looked this over and I don't see anywhere where it necessarily says that it has to stay with the building.
If I could add in, it does say business building owners. Yeah, in business building renovation processes, therefore encouraging increased, lower or sales tax. So it doesn't specifically say equipment. The other thing I brought up, if you recall, is down here that all disbursements through this program will be subject to performance requirements set forth in an incentive agreement, including but not limited to a period of time for which the business must remain in operation following the completion of disbursement of funding. All that is, if we give them, the money, they've got to tell us if there's a 5-year period. If they leave before 5 years, they owe it back to us, or prorated.
And I don't think we look at this. I think what we've got to do, this was brought up because of the Shears situation, but I don't think that we look at it exclusively as just the Shears situation. Is this something that we want to amend to appease the attorney to be able to have the ability to, in the future, to be able to do equipment or things that aren't going to be necessarily attached? And I guess what we're trying to do is establish some kind of language here that would allow us to do that, and I guess burdening enough in the contract that if they sold the equipment that they owe the city back because we didn't wind up getting the tax revenue, or they owe us money from, I mean, any number of things I guess we could put in the thing. But the fact is, are we willing to, in the future, on a case-by-case basis, be willing to broaden out the language that it allows us to give somebody money that's equipment that's not going to stay with the facility?
Well, I asked this question last time of Mr. Sanchez when we approved it, and asked if that was something that a EDC board could typically do, would be give for the funding for that, and he said that it was. If our language of our document excludes it, or our policy has excluded that because of us having historically only given to infrastructure that stay with the building, then I think we should probably amend it to allow that flexibility. But if we're going to do that, there needs to be some teeth in there that if Shears decides they want to, next week, next month, next year, they want to sell that hyperbaric chamber or whatever you called it, and not operate it anymore. Well, I don't know. I think the lawyers, I guess, or whoever it needs to be, needs to come up with a policy to where the city or the EDC can't give money to somebody and then that individual solely profit from it by selling that equipment or removing it from operation or whatever the case might be. And I'm sure there are other EDCs that have already gone down that road and have appropriate language that would be consistent with that we could steal.
They have, I'm sure, and it's I'm glad that you brought that up because we happen to have an expert in the room that can address that.
Right.
Mr. Sanchez, would you?
Martin Sanchez, 2000 North McDonald Suite, 100 McKinney, Texas, 75071. Mr. Jacari, so to clarify, I think tonight's item is to add clarification to the existing policy. The question is, can you do it by state law? Yes, you can. But the current policy doesn't say specifically that you can or that you cannot. But there's a local policy versus state law. State law says you can do it. The local policy just is yeah, exactly. It's silent on the matter. So today's consideration would be, hey, I can see the possible need for it. So if we want to clarify this, so a future commission doesn't find itself in this ambiguity, just write it in your policy, and then it provides guidance for the future. That's really what it is.
So do we rely on the attorney for the actual language? Because I don't know that it should be necessarily up to us to I guess put the proper language into the contract.
I can send you some draft language. It's pretty much in just about all other EDC's policies. Let me give you the biggest example. Let's say you had a manufacturer that wanted to install a conveyor belt to move a widget from A to B, okay? That conveyor belt is no different than the chamber. It's not permanently affixed to the building. It's a piece of equipment that allows them to actually be more effective and more productive in producing their widgets. That's the typical example, but there's nothing that precludes you doing what you did with shears. I think the two items are just separate. Shears is done, it was legal, it was acceptable. This is now clarification for next year when, or 10 years, none of you are here, and the issue comes up again and nobody has any guidance. So I can send you some.
Well, if you could send us some language
Yeah.
that other EDCs would use, and to Kathy's point, I think it's important to address maintenance. So
Yeah.
that in the event that that conveyor belt breaks,
Right.
that I would think it would be incumbent upon the owner of the conveyor belt, regardless of who paid for it or funded it, to operate and maintain that in a working fashion.
That's correct.
As long
And
as
usually
they're
it's
under
also-
a performance
That's
contract.
structured and all part of the performance measures and the clawback measures. That's why you don't usually distribute the funds 100% of your cap, all as one lump sum day one. It's usually spread out over a few years to address issues of maintenance, operation, sinking, et cetera, or them moving out or whatever. There's different mechanisms to claw back the funds, and in essence, you create a mechanics lien type of endowment onto the actual investment.
If I could, Mark, I agree with you, I agree with Roger and Martin, excuse me. Let me give it some thought. Martin, you're doing a lot of work on the strategic plan.
Yes, sir.
Okay, there's various entities to this plan. It's the city council, obviously EDC, city hall, chamber. Why don't we do this? Can I recommend that we have a discussion with this group, and Brad's here, the city council. Why don't we have a seminar, and why don't we get together? I'm looking through this, and I'm not too sure on these resources. They really apply with what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of moving the goalpost once, why don't we fix it right, all of it? Hold on, let me finish.
Yes, sir.
So I'd like to hear Brad's thoughts since open session, but get these groups together, city, EDC, city council, you, Brad, and Stan, and let's recreate this thing where it should be. So it's seamless, it's transparent. So as people apply for these resources, they know exactly what they have to do. There's no question they can meet the application needs. When it does get to city council after it's approved here, they approve it. It's black and white. I'd like us to consider that. I think we're at that stage where we got to get this thing right and not just make little changes. I agree with the shares, but I think we need to think about out of the box long term.
Yes, sir.
I had a quick question. So, all right, in the Economic Development Assistance Program guidelines, we have rental assistance, we have existing business structure assistance and job creation incentives. I mean, do we just need a third, additional section for just business expansion or business development assistance or something? Because lots of things like maintenance and different things we might be looking at incentivizing that aren't necessarily the permanent structure, aren't necessarily, for employees or rent. There might be other things. So, I mean, are we trying to fit it into a section that it shouldn't be placed into? Should there be another section?
Sir, to some degree we are, but I would caution that it's also virtually impossible to construe every possible scenario. So this is why the structures you have today are adequate. It's just updated. They need to be updated. Some of this language is just pretty archaic. It didn't, when the original EDC languages across the state were first drafted, they evolve, and some just have not evolved. I mean, it's no different than with any policy. You have to revisit it on a regular basis. This is just one of those times.
So under the existing business structure assistance, it goes from A to N. Could we just add one more and say structures do not have to be permanent?
In essence, we absolutely
Permanent fixed structures.
We absolutely could do that. That's why let me look for 5 or 6 good examples of good, easy, broad language that then allows future commissions to actually interpret that policy directive as they see fit when those cases arise.
On the
Because
same,
there may be some situations where you say, no, I know that we can do it, but we're still not going to do it, which is fine. Example, somebody comes to you and says, well, I want assistance buying an industrial fan because my warehouse gets too hot. Well, no, that's not your business if you chose that. And I'm just using an example. Right. There's nothing that says it has to be or that it doesn't have to be. I mean, but you don't have to approve it either. Right. It's discretionary on your part.
Martin, in the same vein, to my knowledge, can we please silence all cell phones?
Yes, sir. It's state law.
To my knowledge, we've never had anybody as an EDC director that has the experience that you have as an EDC executive, to my knowledge anyway. When you look at our documents, generally are our documents adequate, and this is just one modification you think would be helpful, or do we need a lot of modifications?
No, I think Mr. Carlson is actually correct, is that they do need to be updated across the board. If you recall, in the last several sessions, and I brought it up again at the last session last month, it's not just, I typically pick on like zoning ordinances and subdivision ordinances only because they're easy to pick on, because I can quote them chapter and verse. But this is also one of those policies. It's not that it's bad or that it's wrong. It's just dated, and it just needs to be revised to satisfy your vision, as we've been discussing for months, the council's vision, to make it easier to do your job. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. I'll give you an example. So another community that I work in, we set up about 20 some odd years ago. We tweaked their version of the existing business structure assistance, and we tweaked it into what was called BREP, Business Retention and Expansion Program. This basically existing business structure assistance is, again, generic language from when EDC law first came into place, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we did with that particular program is we got a little granular but very policy driven. And for example, when we were trying to stimulate the growth in this particular downtown, we saw it incumbent upon to implement our vision to allow things like a grease trap. Let me explain why. These buildings were built 100 and some odd years ago. Well, there was no grease traps back then. You want to put a restaurant in, A, how do you do that? B, where do you locate it? Because technically a grease trap is supposed to be on private property, right? Well, you can't, so you have to have allowances for maybe it's in an easement, maybe it's in a public right-of-way, et cetera. Maybe you size them differently. Maybe you have some, flexibility. And at the same time, you as a commission, as an EDC board, should have the flexibility to say, hey, you got a great restaurant coming in, but it needs a grease trap. But for a $10,000 investment, we might not get this restaurant. And that level of flexibility is what you need, right? 20 years ago, you probably would have never dealt with this. I mean, it just didn't come up. Today's environment, it's, as we're kind of focusing, especially the downtown area, business retention, expansion, it falls into those categories. Hope that gives you a better granular example. Because grease traps are expensive. And worse, they're just problematic when you don't have any land to put them in. So you've got to be creative.
So, quick question. The strikeout on 1B, where does strikeout occur? No?
The last word was here.
Okay, so it's not part of it.
I just pulled this copy because it was what was up front.
So then I'm agreeing with my fellow board members here about let's not just add language for the one situation. It sounds like it needs a review. So if that's the case, then what's our next step?
I think right now we go ahead and we either approve or disapprove of this change, because what Jack is talking about is, that's not a day-long deal. That's going to have to be an initiative that we actually take up and go ahead.
My apologies, sir. What I would, I didn't give you a clear-cut recommendation. My recommendation would be take an action on this particular item. My recommendation would be actually to approve updating this particular item. That doesn't preclude Mr. Carlson's point. We still have to update the entire policy. And at that point, whatever we do tonight is not going to be deleterious to what we do in next month. Is that?
How soon do you think you get us this language?
Oh, yeah. Tuesday?
Ray, give me comments, because it's gotta go through you guys. I'm a bit contrarian a little bit to my friend's body figure.
I do think it would be good for us to have a workshop we hadn't in a while. So we're probably overdue since COVID and everything. The EDC and the council really hadn't had a group meeting to begin with. But GW, your comments there, I think, is where my head's at. What's wrong with having a fourth incentive program maybe that's not structure? So existing business structure, I think, like you guys are going to rotate on and off. I'm not going to be here at mayor. People will come and go. And I guarantee you at some point you're going to have another council and a mayor or whoever sitting here going, okay, it says structure. It doesn't say, but then there's an addendum that says not a structure item. So personally, it feels like to me that needs to be, take structure out maybe and have a separate deal. So that something to be real clean and clear for the public and everybody to go, okay, that's not structure. Because I'd sit in y'all's chairs for 7 or 8 years at EDC, and we used that program for these old dilapidated buildings to renovate them and find a way to get them in. That's really where most of the focus was, although it would work for the old Brookshire's building or any of them that are needing help, to get them back in action. I just think that structure assistance program, if you keep it clean to where you're really talking about the structure physically being able to be put back in action and generate jobs and sales tax, but then take something like this, where this is, as it relates to the Shears deal, that to me it looks like an expansion, a whole nother stream of business from a salon. So like they're wanting to grow their business. If there's an existing business assistance, they want to expand. Here's the business case. Here's the projectional sales tax, job creation, and you guys want to consider it and say, hey, that makes sense. That looks like they got a good business plan, business case. Here's a 5-year plan to help, with that. And it's clean, and then people, y'all can use it entrepreneurially too with businesses going forward. Because you'd like to have something that you guys and gals go, hey, what are the gaps in our economy that we'd like to fill in businesses, and how do we say, okay, we've got a program here. Maybe we advertise, that we're willing to, in some fashion, help with, the location of whatever it may be, but anyway, I would encourage it would be good to have a short workshop. It doesn't have to be an all-day deal. It can be 2 hours together, when Stan's out here on a Thursday night coming home, and we all get together and we have, some pre-work done. There could be pre-work done, because Martin can help us with that. Get all our language cleaned up, kind of have it ready to sit down and say, okay, are we reaching our goals with each of these programs, and can we actually go use them to market, things for the EDC. But that's my thought. Is I think the structure program, personally, I think if you put an addendum that changes it versus what the original program was, I think it's going to add confusion. Where you can still, like, there's nothing pending, so you could actually do that pretty quickly with some language to have something else for the council to approve the new program. Because that's how it'll go down. Maybe that's my 2 cents, but I like the conversation you're having, and it's just realizing we need to update some things and maybe add another category.
Hey, Martin, we all want to figure out ways that we can be flexible. And I guess with this situation, and I don't know how Shears is doing. I hope they're doing great with that thing. But if you think about, is there a way to have some kind of a prerequisite cost analysis involved with the assessment? In other words, the applier has to supply a document so it can be least assessed. Here's what they anticipate is the skin in the game. Yes. Because otherwise, it's like, here's a classic example of, I can't remember what all they applied for, but if we get anybody in this sector in town wants to get in along those lines, I think we have to be careful with precedent. So the more analytical black and white we have, the better we're going to be able to make a good decision.
Absolutely agree with you, sir. In fact, I'm going to bring up a slightly sore subject with the chair and myself, where we had a debate about this issue as well, is that in all that we do, that you should always be cognizant of precedents. Although your decision making does have discretion ultimately, and the ultimate, approval process beyond certain limits is council, right? And council still has discretion. You still want to be able to reach your decision through as a precedent prism, if you would. Did they give us the analytics? How much are we investing? How much are we getting back? In what time frame? What are the guarantees, if you would? I'm going to use that loosely just for a second, et cetera. So to some degree, you have to think about it. If you were walking into, Bancorp South and saying, hey, I need a business equipment loan, they would say, man, I really like you, Mr. Carlson. Great. Show me your business plan. And you say, yeah, no, I don't think so. I just want to go buy these pieces of equipment. Bancorp South is going to say, thank you very much. I appreciate your business, but no, I don't think so. Well, you're no different. You should have those metrics. To some degree, your application process gets you part of the way there, but it may not get you the full way there. And again, this is that cleaning up part, is how do you run it through a metric that says this is a good idea or a bad idea? You still have the discretion, but at least it gives you a benchmark.
We do ask on our application for their business plan,
Yes, sir.
but it's really nothing more than a wild guess in many cases, because they're starting something new that hasn't happened in
Right.
this town with these people, and I think in many cases it's not reliable.
Yes, sir.
I'm looking at this existing business structure layout right here, and it only mentions structure a couple times in it, but it kind of, sets a lot of, has a lot of things in place, like the 2-to-1 match, and, a lot of the things that we want to consider before approving something. We might just be able to take out some of the wording that says structure and use this existing business structure assistance model and just, business incentive and structure assistance, right? We could just use the same thing and take out a couple words.
So for right now, we're not necessarily considering just shares, obviously, because we've already approved the shares deal. So for right now, I think what my motion, or what I would ask to do, is have Martin supply the language, go ahead and approve or disapprove an amendment to this current policy, have Martin approve the language, and then with the commitment going forward, this probably could be overhauled from top to bottom with Martin, but we need to act upon this, whether it be shares or not, for now, and get this in, and have Martin supply that language, and then go forward. Yes.
I think what we're going to try and approve is the intent to move forward for Martin to come up with the language to make recommendation to the council to
Correct.
approve.
You're approving directive for me to go bring you back some concrete language changes, which is a policy shift, and that's approvable.
And would that be coming back to us to then approve, or would it be going to the city council to approve?
It'd be coming back to you to finalize. You're approving a policy.
I make a
Direct.
motion to approve
Policy directive.
missed the last couple of meetings, so I'm kind of playing catch-up here. But, so I wasn't sure whether or not the Shears application had been, whether we had approved that or not. So that's one reason I'm kind of.
Y'all have approved it, council. You've approved it.
So unless we want to come up with language for an amendment today, which I think it's clear we don't, the next move, I believe, is to just tell Martin, giddy up, go find us some language, and we'll come back next time and approve the language that he recommends, to then move to council, so yet this can move forward with Shears.
I think under the circumstances that we're going to have another meeting in the meantime, so it's not gonna be a quarterly meeting.
This has got the
Yes.
Shears thing in limbo.
That'll work.
I agree.
So do I have to get a motion to table it? So we're just moving forward. Okay. So, on action item number 2, consider an act upon approval of amendment to incentive policy. We are tabling it. Moving on. Appointment of board officers for May 2022 through April 2023. Do I have any comment with regard to that? So currently, myself as president, Mr. Zakir is vice president, Gail is secretary, is that technically? Secretary treasurer, yeah, that we got. That's your current board. I have one more year that I guess, can Zakir serve, he can serve as vice president as long as he wanted to, couldn't he? So I'm the only one that would just have 1 year of left as far as president is concerned before we'd have to nominate and elect another president. But I just need to know if anybody has any changes or anything.
I'm just gonna, so we're all clear on what is selection of officers. The initial president and vice president shall, the initial president and vice president shall be elected by the board and shall serve a term of 1 year. On the expiration of the term of office of the original president and vice president, the board shall select from among its members individuals to hold such office. The term of office of the president and vice president shall always be for a period of 1 year from the date of selection by the board, provided however that the president and vice president continue to serve until the election of their successors.
So, that's the corporation law says you can be president for 3 terms, so that would be a 1-year term. It doesn't address the secretary, treasurer, or the vice president.
Okay.
So, only the president, after a 3rd term, would need to be replaced. But you can replace them every year if you choose to. But it does have to be renewed every year.
Yeah.
I would make a motion to re-elect Mark as the president, me as vice president, and Gail as the treasurer, unless we have others who would like to make a different motion.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Consider an act upon application by Julia Munoz for a board member. Everybody should have her application on file. I've spoke with most of you, I think, with regard to Julia, and if you knew her. I've had conversations with the mayor where we don't necessarily have to have an interview process or anything like that. Julia is the only application that has been received thus far for the open position of Mr. Mays. As far as I know, I don't know Julia that well, other than just in passing for the most part. I have very high recommendations from her, or from people throughout the community that speak very highly of her. I can tell you this, she's got a motor that doesn't stop. She's a go-getter from that perspective. I think she's been in service to the community in a lot of different respects, and I personally, I don't know, there's not a lot to the application. I was hoping that maybe she'd be here where we could ask her some questions if you wanted to. This is a little bit different process that we're going through filling this board position, and I think a lot of it has to do, sometimes, or the reason that maybe we don't have as many applications is because we don't have a newspaper that broadcasted out there and some other things, but I don't want that to discount the fact that I think Julia would be more than capable of filling a role here on our EDC. She's got financial experience. She's been a part of the community for years. I'll just give my recommendation to the fact that I would think that she would add considerably to our board, and I would suggest that we review this and approve it, and that's my recommendation. And I'd like to hear anybody else that knows Julia maybe a little bit more than I do.
I have the pleasure of serving with her on the industrial board. She was a director, and I found her very intelligent, very reliable. She's smart. She thinks out of the box, and she's got a good financial background, which is really good. So I tend to think the same thing. I will say I'm really disappointed we're not getting more people applying for these positions. And
Y'all will recommend people, we will talk to them.
okay, and I think if I can also recommend, as a group, we get together and talk about these things periodically. Not necessarily just an open. I mean, it's important that we dialogue candidates to the future, so we have a bench.
You can't talk in,
Can't even talk about who we recommend?
unless it's an actual meeting that's posted.
Okay. Well, can I talk about diversity? The other thing is I think it's embarrassing that we don't have more females on this board. We were called the old white guys. Now, I'm the oldest guy by far on this board, and I'm the only white guy on this board. So, and Gail, we need to get more females on this board. Welcome to the world of 2020. This is diversity, and we have to reflect what this community looks like and how it is, and so that we gain. Those are the things where the community will look at us with trust, and involvement. And I don't speak of the choir, but that needs to be a prerequisite for us moving forward.
All right. I'd like a motion to approve Julia Munoz as our next board member, our newest board member.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Congratulations, Julia Munoz. This has been kind of a work in the process from the standpoint that council was going to do it. We didn't have the opportunity to discuss it, so I'm glad we've got this behind us now. So that's the close of the regular session. It is. Oh, board member. Right. Oh, that's right. Scholarship. Kevin and Gail. So what we annually give a scholarship. We give 2 scholarships to high school kids. How many applications did we have?
Oh,
I think there were 111 or something.
yes, there were a lot.
Yeah, the school just did.
Well, I'm going to let you two take the ball here because I know that, thank you, by the way, for going through all those applications. And by the way, while we're in this. Do you mind, being the one again this year to give those scholarships?
I'll be there anyway, so.
Okay. I've been prohibited from saying who's getting those applications, so I would ask that y'all not say the same thing, or do the same thing, but, if you would just elaborate on the application process and kind of how you came to your decisions. And
Well, as Tina said, there were over 100 applications, many very deserving students. However, what we looked at, what our criteria is, that we hope that the students will come back to Mount Vernon, go to a trade school or a 2-year school, and come back to Mount Vernon and share their business expertise, go into business here, and bring it back to our community. And there were a couple of students who met that criteria, and those were the ones that Kevin and I selected.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny in reading, and we read every application. It went the gamut of those that quick penciled it to those that had a lot of thought to it. And I was very comfortable with the candidates we came up with for the reasons that Gail had said. The interesting thing, though, when I was reading these, and you look at the number of people that are leaving, whether they're going, local community college or whatever, or actually leaving, very few mentioned they're coming back. And that was very eye-opening to me for those that were actually leaving, because a lot of what we talked about in the focus groups and stuff, how do we encourage and create that environment where they want to come back? So it was a little eye-opening to me, but there were some really, really good applications too. We have a lot of exciting students moving forward, so.
Well, that's great. Thank you, and thank you for your work in going through those. And in advance, congratulations to the scholarship winners. And thank you for giving those out. When are you doing that, by the way? What is it? Is it the 16th?
May 16th, the
Okay.
academic banquet.
Okay. All right, moving on. Business incentive lunches. That was Mr. May was in charge of that prior to his departure from the board. Mr. May was in charge of that. And we need to get that kicked back in, and I'm going to nominate tonight Mr. Anthony to take up that charge. We have been trying to do that on a monthly basis. I think, first of all, I'm a little bit disappointed in some of the turnouts that we had with regard to councils not showing up much. That's on Brad. And then I'd like as many of us to show up as possible to these. So I'd like to just do them. So, yeah, that's on me. So I'd like to do these on a quarterly basis, but get advance notice out in plenty of time, and it may be harassing. Yes. I know, but maybe if we do this on a quarterly basis, we can get a little bit better turnout from us and the council as well. So, Mr. Anthony, if you'd take that charge up, and let's find somebody here within this next quarter to get a business lunch done, and then we'll do what we can to make the turnout a little bit better than what it has been as it's progressed here. So, you okay with that?
I'll take care of it.
All right.
You wanna do one per quarter?
One per quarter, yep. All right, now we're moving forward to report from consultant, Mr. Martin Sanchez, with regard to what you've been up to.
Mr. Chair, members of the EDC, Martin Sanchez, 2000 North McDonald Suite, 100 McKinney, Texas, 75071. Sorry, it's a habit. I just have to get it out. Otherwise, I'll feel all out of place. Lots of things to talk about. Let me kind of touch on a few items that you guys have just talked about. So, what Mr. Carlson discussed regarding a joint work session, we discussed that again at our March meeting about more cohesiveness, more policy-driven discussion to try to kind of clean up some of this direction. I think it's an absolute imperative. Thank you, Mr. Carlson, for those comments. Next, moving to a quarterly, I think absolutely, again, we discussed that last month. it's more impactful, it gives you more time, you're not as rushed, and you can plan a little bit better. You'll have better participation as well. I would like to touch on the issue of the scholarships and the kids, and it ties in actually to something you said, Mr. Carlson, as well, about more applications for board members or commission members, and not just to this board, to any board. We touched a little bit about this on last month in March. Some of the interesting findings that we have had after interviews, after lots of focused discussion groups, et cetera, and I actually interviewed a whole bunch of kids as a part of my 113 interviews that I had in the last 6 months. And what you said is absolutely, it's not a happenstance of what you gathered, that kids are not saying, I'm going to come back. I referred to it, for those of you that were there, we call it in community development circles as the brain drain syndrome. You know, you've got young talent, they go and as they're growing up and spreading their wings, go get educated, and you don't come back. So what happens to your base population? Over time, that base population is getting older, sorry, Mr. Carlson, and passing away, and you have less and less of that younger energy and entrepreneurship backfilling. That's a very real issue. One of those long-term policy concerns that I truly would have for Mount Vernon at all levels in a way of improving that issue. That's one of those items, if you don't really focus on it, I know it sounds a little goofy, but if you don't focus on it, 10 years from now, you'll look around and this whole place will be empty. And you won't have enough people to staff a committee, especially one of this magnitude. It's a real issue in many communities, especially where we're at pivotally. But it also ties into, so the kids, right, the young adults, and also in general, just people that are connected and want to be part of the system. It's happening for fundamentally the same reasons. I suggested in March, and I'm going to harp on that a while longer, not tonight, but I'm just going to mention it tonight, and then hopefully at our joint session, where really we need to be able to focus on some leadership growth strategies. I talked about in other communities we've set up things like leadership, processes where, organizations, Lowe's, the city, Brookshire's, the banks, et cetera, all kind of put forth John Doe, Susie Q, et cetera, and they go through a year-long training or a 6-month training to get to know different aspects of the community. A, how does the government run? B, what are the actual resources? C, D, et cetera. But you go through these trainings, and what you're really doing is, A, you're encouraging civics, right? But B, what you're really doing is getting the next Ms. Reed to be engaged, so that when that next commission member or board member comes up available, you've got a pool of people that you've been grooming, so to speak, to be involved. That's how you counteract some of the brain drain syndrome.
Martin?
Yes, ma'am.
We do have a program in the high school called Leaders of Tomorrow.
Correct.
So
yes,
that is
it
a little
ties
bit
all
about
back
what
into
you're
it.
talking
That's where
about.
I was going with next. It's not just at the quote-unquote adult professional level, but it also to expand, and really I picked up on that as a mantra to say, hey, they're doing it, we should support them, grow them, groom them, and then we should also be doing one for, professionals, young adults, et cetera, to kind of grow our leaders of tomorrow. I mean, I would advocate as part of coordinating with the ISD to groom those young adults, let them come be mayor for a day and experience what it's like to sit on that side and ask these kinds of questions and have to listen in policy, et cetera. You want to get them engaged. My 15-year-old daughter today is in Austin for the next 4 days presenting a youth in government bill in front of at the state capitol. Those types of activities engage your youth to give them a reason why to participate. And if they participate at any level, you've increased exponentially their desire to want to come back and actually be part of the community. So with that, I'm just going to stop there, leave it there, let it fester a little bit, and we'll talk more about it in the future, right, if we could. The other thing I wanted to really just kind of report on is that actually Ms. Reed and I have been attending, and I'm going to butcher the name, so you're going to maybe have to help me, the Northeast Texas Arts and Entertainment Co-op. There you go, I got it. This is actually pretty neat, and I brought it up a little bit last month, but I'm going to really talk about it more today. A group of folks that include Perry Wilson from Los Pinos, it includes the college, it includes different business owners from Pittsburgh, from Winsboro, from as far as Quitman and Mineola, us here in Mount Vernon as well, pardon me? Dangerfield, exactly. Have all kind of come together, and you remember when I gave you guys the equations about economic development, and there's kind of three big aspects, right? Jobs are regional, housing is very personal, right? And then retail you can't control. It'll come as a function of the other two. You know, I've had those discussions before. So on that regionalism issue, what this group has come together doing is, how do we promote, us in Northeast Texas, promote not just to ourselves but to the outside world, all the wonderful things that are happening here that a lot of people, most people, never know about. You know, the festivals in Pittsburgh, the festivals here in Mount Vernon, Winsboro, etc. Because collaboratively, regionally, if we all get together and advocate for these things, it brings a spotlight to all of us. One of the big interesting things that we've been going through as anecdotes is that repeatedly I hear, well, we all can't be Mount Vernon, and well, you know, these are from other communities. Well, if only we were as good as Mount Vernon. And those are good things that you guys should feel positive about and get some feedback. Your neighboring communities all are looking at us as kind of the thought leaders in many different avenues, and this is one of them. One of the other interesting items is that I took the opportunity in the two meetings I've attended to and talked about some of the same things we've talked about, which is community, right? Long-term citizens, residents, people, what we're trying to do for the future, the importation of those several $100 million worth of disposable income every Thursday that leaves every Sunday, and how you capture these things, right? And you'd be surprised, across the board, every community has been thinking the same thing, suffers the same thing. How do they contact, coordinate, buy into with the transplants that come in every weekend? Because they all recognize that they've done a poor job of being able to take advantage of that. Again, a positive thing that we've been doing. Yes, ma'am.
Just want to comment on that a little bit. Today, I toured a representative from Wiley, Texas, through our museums and through around the area here. And his comment was that Mount Vernon has it going on. He said Wiley, Texas has 60,000 people in their city limits, and he said, we have nothing. We have no museum, we have no depot, we have nothing for that type of cultural entertainment in Wiley. They were coming to Mount Vernon
Right.
to get it figured out. So
Right. All of you should really feel very proud of those efforts, because other people do see it. I suggest, I recommended last month, but I'm really going to reiterate, is to foster these kinds of endeavors. This is not a second commission. This is not any authority that they have, as much as it's interested community leaders, business leaders, etc., to tout all of Northeast Texas together as a package deal. Share Facebook, share social media, share each other's calendars of festivals so that everybody can spread the word, et cetera, et cetera. There may be some, in fact, I'm going to say it more assertively, there will be some things that I will probably come to you with in the next 3 months about some small investment funding, like a website, not the full price, but to be a part of sharing a website to foster this group to kind of get together and things of that nature. But when you talk about the impact of the folks that are at these meetings, it's far-reaching. And so, as the example, like, you know, when Perry is advertising what's happening at Los Pinos, he's really not advertising what's happening at his locale on that gravel road outside of Pittsburgh. What he's saying is, come to Northeast Texas because it's pretty darn cool. And Northeast Texas is all of us. So a real positive aspect from that perspective. This last week, we hosted a lunch here at the Glove Factory, at the loading dock. It was fantastic. And again, they were all just wowed with all the things we've got going on. So with that, I'm going to stop my comments because I'll reserve the rest of my comments for executive session.
And with that, we are now closing the regular session at 6:55. We will now go open executive session.
I will ask, do you anticipate any action from this discussion? There's no agenda, so we're free.
Well, it says we can reconvene
He said, yeah,
and take any action.
no, session 2.